Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Smith. Welcome back to another special edition of Litter Media Live, brought to you today by Classic Brands. In studio today, I have State Representative Mark Johnson of Chillicothe. We're going to be talking about the state budget, which the House will be voting on Wednesday of this week if you're watching this program live. And then, of course, once it passes the House, it goes on to the Senate. But we're going to be talking about a few aspects of that approximately $92 billion state budget that's coming out. We'll get back to Representative Johnson right after this from Classic Brands. We are back with State Representative Mark Johnson. Representative, thanks for being with us.
Good morning. You're welcome.
State budget in Ohio, it's every 2 years, biennial.
That's correct.
And the budget portion that had the transportation aspect to it, approximately $11 billion, that was signed by the governor last week.
Yeah, that was a separate budget. That's how we fund our highways and bridges and so forth.
Why does that always come out separately from the rest of the budget?
It's just been traditionally, that's how it's been done, and anything that pertains to highways, and there is some other issues, some bicycle pass, people throw in trains, and we collect, it's all paid for by your gas tax, your motor fuel tax, and airplanes pay into it too, so there's aeronautical part of it too.
One of the aspects of the proposed budget that the House votes on this week deals with the public libraries. And a number of the libraries around the state of Ohio has collectively been sending out information to voters and to constituents, asking them to contact the House out of concerns that they have, saying that there will be a cut in budget funds. Now, I'm going to read a part of a press release that came to us from the Chillicothe Ross Library, and then I'll let Mark respond to that. There are other parts of the press release, but the meat of the concern the libraries have are in basically these two paragraphs. Mark knows what it is, but for the benefit of our viewers, here we go. Chillicothe and Ross County Public Library is urging library patrons and community members to take action to prevent $100 million from being cut from Ohio public libraries over the next 2 years. Librarians across the state are calling the situation extremely urgent, calling upon library supporters to speak out to their local representatives after the Ohio House released its proposed state budget that seeks to eliminate the public library fund. Paragraph 2, the public library fund is protected by law and is responsible for the majority of Ohio's public library funding. Ohio's public libraries have had a partnership with the state to deliver services at the local level for almost 100 years. The proposal will remove the protection of law and make library funding a lump sum amount in the state's overall budget. This will make it easier for legislators to cut funding for libraries in the future and cut $100 million from Ohio's public libraries over the next 2 years with no guarantees of funding after 2027. Now, the rest of the press release deals mostly with the specifics of the local Chillicothe Ross Library, which would be different from county to county. But those first two paragraphs basically state the overall concern that public libraries around Ohio have. So, State Representative Mark Johnson says what?
Okay, so what they're talking about was, for years, the libraries got a percentage of our general revenue fund. So it was last time and time before last, it was 1.7%. And where the $100 million come from is the governor's budget increased this to 1.75. And that was in the governor's budget. But also in the governor's budget was tax hikes for cigarettes, multiple things, marijuana increases, gambling increases, title fees, I think license tag fees increases, and which that's what I heard the most about is you're going to going to raise my cigarettes and other things in here. And let's face it, there's a percentage that of the people that lives in my district that's an important issue to them. And of course, if the price of cigarettes today doesn't encourage you to quit, then probably another $50 is what the governor proposed was in there. So whether that's a healthy issue or not, I'm not here to say it is or isn't. But anyway, that's some of the concerns. So that the way we would have been funding it was a percentage, and what the House leadership team wants to do was change that back to a flat number. And so we know exactly, just about everybody else in the entire budget has a flat rate number. And whether that's good or bad, I don't know. I'm not the one that makes this decision, nor did I ask for this to be changed. I just sat on finance, but it's the finance chair and some of the leadership that puts these things together. And you know, it's always debatable. And, you know, I have some people that's complaining about their property tax and so forth, says the libraries is antiquated and no longer needed. Well, there's some places I truly believe that they are needed, and they do provide services, and we do have an aging population, and maybe the younger people don't utilize it as much as they used to. But in areas like MacArthur, which I represent, Vinton County, we have a broadband desert, and many gather just for the broadband services and other services. And I'm proud of the quality of library that we have in Vinton County. It's one of the nicer buildings that we have. And another fact is the state of Ohio is #1 in the nation in funding libraries. Mm-hmm. So anyway, on the cuts. So I've had calls, as you might expect, from different people, library board members and others, but say, Mark, what's up with cuts? Well, nobody told me we was going to have a cut. We was just changing the formula of how they were funded. So I got on the phone, I think Thursday or Friday, talked to my majority leader and asked him, I said, what is the issue? Is any library in Ohio facing a cut? And they said, Mark, we had our committee policy directors put out a document, and there was some mathematical mistakes, and some showed cuts. I think Pike County may have been one of them. So, and I said, well, here's what I ask. I said, I don't want anybody to be cut from anything from the last budget. And that's the numbers that we base our funding on. And then we got to figure in for inflation. So that's what I was guaranteed. Again, I just talked to one of the minority leaders, the assistant minority leader, on the way here, and he guaranteed me that nobody's going to get a cut. Every library will get a raise. It's just the formula on how we get there. It's going to be a flat rate number. Now, if we want to argue about that, you know, so be it. But I really don't see the need. Now, in the future, yeah, you're going to have to lobby the next legislature and so forth in your funding cuts. This budget is good for 2 years and another 2 years and so forth. But even at that, they always come to and lobby to protect my percentage. You know, nobody wants to take a cut on anything. You know, schools be what? We'll talk about that later. Mm-hmm. But so anyway, I was guaranteed no cuts to our libraries on funds, on dollar figures. Mm-hmm. And so that's the most important thing to me, is how much money one gets. Now, whether it's a percentage or not, I don't see the argument on whether that's good or bad, but maybe it is. Maybe you are guaranteed a percentage, and as funds go up, you get more money and so forth. But the governor proposed increasing the percentage, where we already are #1 in America in funding our libraries. The state of Ohio is.
So that $100 million cut that everybody's talking about was not actually a cut from last 2 years' budget. It's what simply the governor proposed.
That's what I've been told. Now, okay. I haven't done the math, and I just take what my leadership team tells me.
The question I couldn't remember right before we went on the air. There's been a lot of talk about property tax cuts. What's the story with that?
Well, property tax cuts is very tough in Ohio. You know, our Constitution, our state constitution, that every elected official in Ohio swears and takes an oath to, that we will honor and support our Constitution. In the state's Constitution, your property tax is valued at 35% of your appraised value. So that's in the Constitution. And then it also goes further and says every property owner will be equitably taxed, which you can't tax one more than the other. And then you get into the arguments: commercial real estate versus residential. We have agriculture. They get a reduced rate, and we want our farmers to be prosperous. And some farmers have 2,000 acres or more today, and large grain farms in our region. So that's property tax in our state constitution that we really can't do anything about until the voters decide to change our state constitution. Now, there is the argument on, we have a 10 mil floor and we have a 20 mil floor. The 20 mil floor, it goes up as property values goes up. So if schools reach that 20 mil floor, you know, they get an influx of extra money. So we will address that 20 mil floor, which is basically an unvoted levy increase. And we can do that. And then others have asked us to do homestead exemption. Currently, Ohio, out of this budget, we spend $2 billion in homestead exemption. What that is, that's a plan for retired people over 65 that own their property. They get a percentage that the state actually writes a rebate check to every entity that they voted their property tax to go to. So the schools get a check from the state of Ohio. It's generally, I think, 5 or 10% now. And so to increase the homestead exemption, you're just taking, it's a shell game. You're taking one tax to subsidize another tax. And so it's really not property tax reform to increase the homestead exemption. And then the next question is, if we're going to double that, which is what the County Auditors Association has requested, where are we going to get the other additional $2 billion? And who's going to cut? You know,
Right.
Do they advocate to cut the libraries off? Because that's $585 million.
Yeah.
There's part of it, but you see, the budget process is not an easy thing. It's always controversial, no matter what entity it's funded under, whether it be a state department or what.
You alluded to schools, education. A number of school districts in our region, I've been seeing that they're talking about having to make some cuts. But you were telling me beforehand, as far as the formula is concerned, what you're sending to schools, you're not planning on cuts. Is that right?
Well, under the governor's proposed budget, he was adhering to the Cupp-Patterson, what has been referred to as the school fair funding formula. And that was agreed to by the OEA, the teachers union. That was agreed to by School Superintendents Association and school board associations. I voted for the Cupp-Patterson. And last budget, we put more in than we actually needed. So the Cupp-Patterson formula, it goes per student. The problem that we have in Appalachian counties, which we are one, is we don't have as many students, you know. So we've got school districts like Adena, Huntington, that has lost close to 10% of their student base. So we would be funding empty desk. So we're hoping that, here's my point, is I don't want any school to face a cut. And in the House version, not the governor's version, these school districts will not get a cut. They'll get a small increase. But I also believe down the road in the next legislature, which I may or may not be in there, I've got one more term, so if I'm reelected, I'll be there. I think it's going to be said, if you continue to lose students, you need to manage your program to where through retirements or through attrition, however, you're going to have to reduce because we can't keep continually to go backwards and fund empty desk. And I think that's fair. So we're going to give them a 2-year extension. Nobody's going to get cut. And we're actually adding to the governor's budget $289 million to school funding to this. Now, we're also putting a bonus formula in there because we do have some schools that are growing greatly, you know, out around New Albany, Delaware County, other areas in Ohio. The schools are facing an influx of additional students, and we're going to try to address that too so they can build out.
What were a couple of other things about the budget you mentioned before we went on the air?
Okay, so every state representative has a process that we can submit amendments to this budget. So we got 99 Ohio House representatives. So you can imagine everybody has a different idea. You know, there was an idea about expanding the bed tax an additional 2% for counties that have busy state parks like Hocking County. I'm Hocking County state representative. I have that entire county. They have the busiest state park in Ohio, at least 3 times busier than any park in Ohio. And with that, plus there's a lot of Airbnb cabins out around it. You know, it's a beautiful part of Ohio, probably the most beautiful part of Ohio in my opinion. And I go out there a lot. And so with that comes problems. We have the Laurelville Fire Department. Their chief's name is Butch Valentine, great guy. He spends a lot of time, probably more time, going to Conkles Hollow for rescues. Conkles Hollow is the most dangerous state park, but it's also busy. Yeah. If people would just stay on the marked pass, not jump over the handrails and take pictures out on the edge of the cliffs, bad things probably wouldn't happen. But as you know, with social media and everything, a lot of people like to get those pictures. And we've had, as you recall, we've had logs falling off the cliff and everything else falling. So the first people they call and rescue is the volunteer fire department and EMS. In Hocking County, we have a county-wide EMS. But that puts strains on that. Also, we have the Logan Hocking Community Hospital. 60% of their patients aren't from Hocking County. Wow. Because of the state park. So with that, that was not included. That was not included in the budget. You know, that increase. I also put an amendment to give a tax cut, a tax credit for volunteer fire department and EMS people in our county, in Ross County. We have a lot of volunteers. You know, I spent time at like Harrison Township out there. They do a great job covering, and the state mandates that they have this training. And basically the tax credit was your first year you get $250 Ohio state income tax credit. If you've been there more than a year, you get a $500, and you get a $750. It was higher rates the first time I asked, but that was turned down. So I said, well, we'll just cut these in half and see where that goes. Well, even my half rate amendment was turned down. Wow. But we got to somehow address our volunteer fire departments and their funding. We've got to address EMS in this county, and how we get there, it's still debatable. I've tried to get state assistance for it, but obviously that didn't happen.
So with the House introducing their version of the budget this Wednesday, if it passes, then it goes on to the Senate. The Senate will suggest probably some changes. When that happens, it goes back to a conference between the two assemblies before it can ever become a bill.
Yeah, it'll
or final bill.
We have two choices. We can concur with what the Senate does. If both House and Senate are working together, that might happen, and we might work out any issues between the two if they're getting along. Last time, they were not getting along so well, and the Senate wanted to take $100 million away from the career tech expansion. As you know, our career tech school is expanding today, and I stood firm for that because our career tech Center here in Pickaway Ross turned away 400 students
Yeah.
2 years ago. This time we're still turning away students. It's not as many, but we got to prepare people for our workforce, and that Career Tech Center is important. It's helps. It won't get you everything that you need for the workforce, but it prepares you, and it's an avenue that feeds apprenticeship programs. If you want to go on to be a nurse practitioner or an RN, you get your basics there. There's so many programs out there that's so important to our employers here, our correction officer training and other things, and law enforcement. It's just, I believe in career tech, and we argued that out, and we had held out for that $300 million where they wanted to cut it $100 million. So things like that happen. The conference committee will just be basically our leadership versus third leadership if it goes there, and it'll be a small group that decides what goes in, what doesn't go in, and they may have a compromise, and I hope that we all try to say, hey, I don't want libraries cut. I want my schools funded, and that's Mark's wishes. I'm not here to cut anybody on anything.
Obviously, the budget, when you're talking about $90+ billion, there are so many various aspects to this. We obviously don't have, if we talked about every single thing, we would miss the vote on Wednesday.
Well,
but we're trying to bring out some of the highlights.
And here's the reality of it. Our budget is a Sears and Roebuck catalog, that thick, and our state constitution is almost that big.
Yep.
And we also have to adhere to our state constitution, and what's in that constitution determines on how we go about doing things. Now, we all, our jobs is to revise the Ohio Revised Code. We're the lawmakers, and I'm your representative, and I try to do what my constituents want me to do.
Whether it answered all of your questions the way you wanted to hear it or not, that was not the point of this interview. The point was to try to have Representative Johnson come in and answer some of the topical things that have been floating out there on the news and in social media over the last few days at least, and leading up to the House vote coming up this Wednesday. And Mark, we appreciate your taking the time to come down.
Thank you.
Again, State Representative Mark Johnson, based out of Chillicothe, our guest today on the Litter Media Live Special Edition, brought to you by Classic Brands. I'm Mike